We do not take that lightly at all. If you're online, do note that the sermon notes are there for you. You just need to click the link. And always, if you're online and worshiping, you can print those notes before. I usually get them on there Saturday night. You can print them before worship. I would encourage you always to have a Bible ready, have the sermon notes and a pencil, and write down the things that you want to remember. And always, my goal is that there will be something that you actually want to remember. And in these times, there's a lot we need to remember. A lot we need to remember. And one of the things, I worked a lot this week. Cameron helped me too, because there's so many things you want to say in times of chaos. And it just took me back to something y'all have heard me say before. The time to figure out these deeper truths of Jesus is never in the midst of a storm. There is a reason we need to go to church and we need to raise our children in church, and whenever we can, it's like going to the gym. We're getting strong because at some point you're going to need the strength. We know this. Life is not this, well, maybe it is a Forrest Gump box of chocolates, but it's not always pretty. As a matter of fact, we know life inevitably brings chaos and suffering. What we don't want to do is to be those people who ignore God and act like God doesn't matter, but then our lives fall apart, and we run to God as if God is this Band-Aid, that we've kept under the sink. That's where we keep our Band-Aids and stuff, and you're like, ooh, I'm not feeling good. Let's pull out the God Band-Aid, and we put the God Band-Aid on, and when the distress is over, which it will be, we pull the Band-Aid off, and we throw it away until distress comes another day. That's not how God works, by the way. Anytime we come to God, make no mistake, God will come to be with us. We're going to study that in just a minute. But if you want the power of God in your life, if you want your faith to make a difference, our faith is like this, right? When life is doing this. That's why it shouldn't matter if we cancel church for the next 3 months. Are you still going to have a Sabbath? I hope so. It doesn't matter if we cancel church for the next 3 months, or if this church goes under and are you still going to have a daily devotional? Yes. Right. Are you still going to try to be grateful in all circumstances? Or are you still going to try to pray without ceasing? Or are we still going to find a way to serve the poor? And by the way, we got to talk about that. I don't know. Maybe we need to figure out how to feed kids if they're not eating for a while. We're going to have to think through some things. This is changing. But does our walk with Jesus change at all if the world falls apart around us? I'll put it this way, it shouldn't. It shouldn't. Why? Because the world is always falling apart around us. The world's been falling apart around us. And if it's not the coronavirus, folks, it's going to be something else. We've been, and y'all have heard me say this before this, is that we're in this period of peace and prosperity right now that's unprecedented. The way it used to be was Korea and Vietnam and World War II and World War I and the Civil War, and that used to be normal. What is not normal is having decade after decade of basically no major war. Who knows what's going to happen between Saudi Arabia and Russia and this oil thing? Wars have been fought for a lot less. Jesus, pretty sure Jesus was the one in John 16. I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think Jesus was the one talking in John 16. Let's see. Yeah, it was Jesus. If you got your Bible, pull it out, read this. So Jesus, who Christians believe was the enfleshment of God, who came to live among us to help us, not to give us all these horrible rules to follow, to give us healthy ways to live life. I'm about ready to do away with the word commandments, because commandments like, you're going to do this and you're going to do that. I mean, yes, I give my son commandments, but it's always for his good. So here's God in Jesus talking to us about these things. I have said these things. What? At this point, he's coming to the end of his life. He's like, man, I've been talking to you about what? About the distress of the world. About the sufferings and the persecutions and the hardships and the relationship issues and the letdowns and the disappointments. He goes, look, I've said these things so that you will have peace in me. In the world, you will have distress. But be encouraged. I have conquered the world. And be sure to know, he says this, and then he gets crucified. So the way Jesus conquers the world, and we're going to hit this hard from a couple angles here. Jesus was rejected by the Jewish leaders because he wasn't the world conqueror that they wanted him to be. Jesus was rejected by people because he didn't come in and literally physically conquer the Romans and set their lives on this earth up the way they thought it should be set up. But he still conquered the world anyway. Really important stuff. So back to we're halfway through a series on Jeremiah, and I just want to pull some ties into this because it's very relevant. We started a couple weeks ago talking about basically the overall look of Assyria. They were on the decline, but they were still a world power in a sense. They were just north of Judah. You had Babylon that was kind of east of Judah that was on the way up, and you had Egypt just south of there. Matter of fact, let me just put it on here. It's fascinating because you've got this little country. You got Assyria, in a sense. Babylon was coming here. They were on the uprising. You had Egypt and the continent of Africa down here. And this has struck me this week. One of the reasons I think God chose this particular spot for Jesus to come, what's west of Israel? Western Europe. What's north? Russia. What's east? China. What's south? I thought that was kind of wrong. I'm like, how in the world all these years have I never seen that? This is like the epicenter of all these trade routes where the gospel could literally go to all the world at the time. I mean, obviously, where we live wasn't on the map, but pretty remarkable. So anyway, but part of the problem is and I should have put Egypt here. So if Egypt wanted to conquer Babylon or Assyria, which they did, guess who they went through? Israel. If Assyria wanted to conquer Egypt, where did they go through? Israel. If Babylon wants to conquer Assyria and Egypt, where do they go through? Israel. Israel. I mean, and by the way, you really can't go through here. Not the easiest place to march an army through that part of the world. So Israel is at this epicenter in a sense. It's at it's the I-35, I-30, 820 interchange, and they weren't able to put any toll roads in, right? I mean, it's just like one, and traffic's always backing up with Israel, and the problem with that is that a people lived there, and every time a country went through, they conquered them and made them become Egyptians, and now they've become Babylonians, or they've become Assyrians, and they were always in the midst, okay, of chaos. They were always, in a sense, one day away from some huge world event, Assyria, Babylon, or Egypt, coming in and destroying their way of life. Here we go. And they couldn't control it. It was out of their control. They were this little peon country in the context of one of the greatest civilizations in world history, Assyria, or the next one, Babylon. Keep that in mind. It was out of their control. no matter how many preventative steps they took, they knew it was one step away from the way of life that they enjoyed being demolished, ruined. For one small sliver of time, and this is what we talked about last week, you had King Josiah. He's between Manasseh, Ammon, and then you have who were idol worshipers. You had Josiah in the middle, and then you had, Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah, who were all idol worshipers. And you had this one king, Josiah, and we talked about this a little bit last week, who he saw the idol worship in the temple. Manasseh had put literal idols in the temple of David, and they had set up temple prostitution and idols to Asherah outside the temple, and they had idols to Molech out in the valley of Ben Hinnom, where that would become the valley of Gehenna, where they would literally go sacrifice their children to the gods of Baal or Molech. Right? I mean, it was just crazy stuff. But in that one small time when Josiah was there, it was relative peace. And in times of peace, Jeremiah's job was to afflict the comforted. The comfortable. Afflict the comfortable. And one of the things I've been trying to do with those other sermons is say, look, we are way too comfortable in this country. We kind of think everything's going to be fine forever. We assume we're going to have our jobs forever. The employment rate was 2 weeks ago, 3.5%. I mean, that's abnormally low. We all assumed even a few weeks ago the stock market was at 29,000, and of course it's going to keep going up. Maybe not. Y'all following this? So in times of peace, we followers of Jesus have to be very careful, and this is where we ended last week. One, that's all right, you got it. You can only worship online at home. Yes. Anyway, two things I wanted to bring up last week, and I want to ask you, what did you do with it? But in times of peace, in times when it is so tempting, right, to not follow Jesus because, well, we don't need the Band-Aid, are you still keeping Jesus first? And where we ended was, in times of peace, we have to be so careful also that we're not following what has become normal by society standards, but by God's standard is just wrong. And I asked y'all to think about that. I invited you to pray about what are you doing? How are you thinking? What have you adopted from society that society is considered normal? And we talked about movies. We talked about stuff we see on computers. We talked about alcohol. We talked about all kinds of stuff. What if you just kind of, a part of you said, I shouldn't, but it's not that big a deal. Everyone else is doing. Where have y'all done that? Where have you done that? Have you done better this past 7 days? I'll tell you, for me, I gave up following the internet and doing internet searches for Lent. And it's been fascinating how much part of me just longs to get on the internet and do searches and go do all this stuff. And a part of me notices that I think I may have a little addiction to that. What is a false god? Little g. A god is an underlying force that controls your life. Okay? It controls your thoughts. When you're going in this direction, all of a sudden you feel, and this is where idolatry becomes so personal, you feel it pulling you off center. If you have awareness, you know you shouldn't be doing this. And yet so many of us, because they are on the altar of our hearts, we just won't say no. We have gods, according to Craig Gershel, but, of money, of job, trying to please other people. Here we go. Longings for the future. I can't be happy until this is fixed. I can't have peace until the coronavirus is gone. Why? Because all I'm going to do is dwell on it. That's what I'm going to do. Or sufferings from the past. I can't have peace. I can't have joy. I can't be happy until, oh yeah, wait, I can never get over it because of what happened to me is never going away. Longings is where I want you to see, especially we're in this media frenzy. Good grief. I know the coronavirus is out there now. I get it. Is it helpful now that it's on it's on the NFL Network. It's on the baseball network. It's on all of the news channels. I only get the newspaper now. Guess what? You know how many pages? It's on the business page. It's on the life page. It's on the front page. I get it. Why is the world doing this? Because we are basically saying now, until this is resolved, I can't move forward with my life. And ultimately, you know why this is really a problem? Is because nobody really knows how to resolve it. And so it's this unknown outcome. It'd be one thing if they said, we've canceled the NBA, but we're going to start in 30 days. It would be one thing if they said to us, cancel church this week, just have it online, but you can have it in 4 weeks. Nobody knows. And that, my friends, is where I think we are going crazy, is because we don't have control of our environment. Which means who or what is controlling us? This is idolatry. It is so obvious if we're willing to see it and have the humility and awareness. Idolatry, it's when any underlying force is controlling us. All right, let me give you some tools. First thing for all of us when we're dealing with chaos in life, it's a marriage issue. It's a child issue, it's coronavirus, it's Ebola, it's swine flu, it's whatever we're going to get next year and cancel church again. We are going to have distress. The first thing is we need to ask ourselves, what is undergirding your life in times of chaos? Right? What's the anchor? Do you have one? So in Jeremiah 29:11, what a great verse, one of the best verses in the whole Bible. In fact, Jeremiah 29:11. Go home, underline it, study it, reflect on it, because this isn't just talking about a virus, it's talking about when you face darkness in your life, when you face an unknown, uncontrollable outcome, when you're tempted, to fall into despair. We're going to talk about the difference between hope and despair in just a second. Before we get to it, though, listen to the word of the Lord. I know the plans I have in mind for you, declares the Lord. They are for plans for peace, not disaster, to give you a future filled with hope. Boy, that's a good one. I know the plans I have in mind for you. Who's the you? People who love Him. If you think that sounds familiar, it does. God works all things out for the good of those who love Him. Even in the midst of a crucifixion. Doesn't mean the crucifixion goes away. Doesn't mean the distress of the world goes away. I know the plans I have in mind for you, declares the Lord. They are plans for peace, not brokenness, not chaos, not frenzied craziness, but peace, wholeness, not disaster. Your life is not going to fall apart if you love me. Things will work out. They've always worked out. When have they never worked out? You're like, well, when somebody died. No, if they're in Christ, it even worked out then too. Look, the worst thing is never the last thing with Jesus, ever. We always have a future with hope. And I do believe it's in this life, if we follow Christ. And then most certainly is in the life to come. We started 2 weeks ago where God tells Jeremiah, I knew you before you were formed in your mother's womb. And now he's saying, and I have a plan for you. I've always had a plan for you. And by the way, this is in the midst of disaster. Now, when this is being written, things are falling apart for Jeremiah and for Judah. It's like, take a deep breath, buddy. I am with you always. You are never alone in this stuff. I will work all things out for the good of you because you love me. So you keep loving me and watch me work, even as the world is falling apart around you. In 1 Thessalonians 4:13, I won't turn to it, but Paul's saying, look, we don't want you to be like those people who have no hope. In fact, I will put it down just so you see it. By the way, I had like an 8-hour message today, so I promise not to do that to you. I met with Cam, and he's like, dude, that's a lot. So anyway, we don't want you to be like people with no hope. That's what's going on. That's why everybody's going crazy. Because for them, all life is about is live long and prosper. And all of a sudden, that's threatened. Can you tell me, if you read the sermon notes, yes, you can tell me, but what's the opposite of hope? I actually had to look this up. I was like, I think I know, hopeless. Wait, but that doesn't count. You can't define a word right, with the same word. We always say that with my son. He's like, what does this mean? He's like, well, it means not hope, unhope. So what is hope? Hope is an optimistic state of mind. You are choosing, not that the glass is half full, you're choosing to see the glass is overflowing because you have water to drink at all. Optimistic state of mind that is based on an expectation of a positive outcome. To trust in, to wait for, to look for, to expect good and blessings in the future. In the midst of ruin, disaster, chaos, whatever. The opposite of that, by the way, and don't do it now. If you're online at home, I guess you can do whatever you want to do. But I'm calling you out anyway. But anyway, despair literally means hopeless. The complete absence of hope. The pessimist, the discourager. What do you think? Can you have hope in chaotic times? Can you have hope when someone you know gets the coronavirus? Can you have hope when someone you know dies? Of course. If. Can you fill in the blank? And I will say this, if you don't have fill in the blank, of course you're going to despair, because what else is there? Mark chapter 4, and we'll jump through a couple quick ideas and pull it together. What a great passage. It's always amazing to me with these scriptures, Old, New Testament, whatever. I've read this a million times, come back to it, and it's like, oh, I never saw that before. That's how God works, right? There's always more. Don't ever think you know all that. I don't know all that. That's why we got to keep coming back and going back and thinking, reflecting. So Jesus he's been teaching he's tired, they're done, they need to cross the sea. And so they get in this boat. We'll start in Mark 4:35. It's late in the day, and Jesus says, let's cross the other side of the lake. And they left the crowd. In verse 37, gale force winds arose, and the waves crashed against the boat, so the boat was swamped. And I love verse 38. In the midst of all the chaos, Jesus is in the rear of the boat sleeping on a pillow. The Greek word pillow there means pillow. Insert, the disciples were going nuts. They had lost their minds. And they're up on the top screaming and yelling. You can just see, what are we going to do? And the sail's this and this. And somewhere in that, somebody says, wait, maybe we need to go to Jesus. So one of them, or maybe all of them, goes screaming down to Jesus. He's asleep, what? On a Greek pillow. And they probably shook him. They're yelling, they're just frenzied. Teacher, don't you care that we're drowning? And I can just see Jesus like, you are? Where's the water? I can see a part of him being like, oh my goodness, you're drowning? Like right now? Because it looks to me like you're talking to me. Can you see? So he got up. He goes to the top and notice what he says to the storm. Silence. Quiet. I love the translation, which is not common. It says, peace. Be still. And what I want you to hear in this is that Jesus wasn't just talking to the storm. He was talking to the disciples. Because as soon as the storm calmed, you know what calmed in the disciples? Their hearts and their minds. And notice how Jesus responded. I love it. Why were you so afraid? Don't you have any faith at all? And the disciples were like, he's talking to him, right? I didn't go crazy. I mean, I wasn't one of the ones. And Jesus is like, yeah, right. It was all of you. Y'all going crazy. Peace. Be still. I don't really think the point of that was Jesus calming the storm. I think the point of that was Jesus calming the storms, especially the ones in the disciples' hearts. Can you do that when your life falls apart? Can you do this when the world's going nuts around us? It's hard to do. Why? Because we have a hard time differentiating between healthy and unhealthy fear. Let's be clear. We need to respect coronavirus. We do. We need to respect it. No, I'm not shaking your hand. I'm just not. And I shouldn't. No. There's certain things we're not going to do. Because there are some people who are vulnerable to it. And on their behalf, we're going to respect it. But we should not be afraid of it. Y'all know how many people have died in the world since I started the sermon? 1 every 12 seconds. Y'all know how many people in the world died yesterday? Over 7,500. Y'all know how many people have died from the flu in our country since October? Guess is between 20 and 30,000. We should respect death too, in whatever forms it comes in. We need to dignify life and stop thinking that we're going to live forever. And I tell you, that's one of the problems and one of the reasons church is so empty is because we all think we're going to live forever, as if that's the point. It's never been the point. Somehow, by the way, we have to get from here to heaven. It's not going to happen if we all live forever. We're going to talk about this a little bit next week, perhaps. I'm trying to decide what to talk about next week. But look, we need to die, people, because that is birth into eternal life. And nobody wants to live in this world forever when we could rape and steal and lie and cheat and be mean to each other, but never get hurt physically. That would be a living hell. Billy Graham, great statistic. 1 out of 1 people die. Our problem is our society takes all the dignity out of it. We have one of the most beautiful funeral services yesterday I've ever been a part. It was so great. I walked away he was a godly man. He had dignity in life and he had dignity in death. And I walked away going, man, I wish every funeral I was ever a part of was like this. The gods of Judah, Molech, Baal, Asherah, the reason that they worshiped those gods is because they had things out of their control. And when they prayed to the God of Israel, and God didn't bow to their will and let them wave a magic wand and do whatever they wanted, which was conquer Babylon, Assyria, whatever, they said, you know what, well, God, if you're not going to do what we want you to do, we'll go over to those gods. Their lives were falling apart. They couldn't control a situation. So one of the ways that they thought they could control war and battle was to go worship the god of Molech by sacrificing a child. And so Manasseh, the king, took his child, went out and burned him to death, thinking that if I burn my child to death to this god of Molech, we're going to have freedom and independence. And did it work? Nope. Nope. The underlying forces that control our lives, for so many of us, it is a fear, an unhealthy fear of death. Death, the ultimate uncontrollable outcome. I will suggest to you that's one of the reasons our society is panicked. It's because they don't have a rock. They don't have an anchor. They don't realize that literally we're all standing on a rock that God's holding up. And if God ever said, you know what? The whole cosmos would evaporate, much less our little bitty ant lives. For believers, our reaction can be to go out and do what everyone else is doing. I was going to show a video of the toilet paper stuff, but we don't do that. But it is a perfect example of how it has nothing to do with the coronavirus, but since everyone else is doing it, now more people are doing it. And so it's become a normalized thing go, maybe you shouldn't. It's not helpful at all. But anyway, these videos on people fighting over toilet paper and stockpiling toilet paper, I'm like, I just don't get it. I just don't get it. Mom was telling me, I was asked her about it, and she said, because we used to live in South Alabama where we had hurricanes quite often, and one of the things that she thought was so strange is a couple weeks before every hurricane, people would go just take everything off the shelves. And a lot of these people weren't even staying home. They're going north where the hurricane didn't hit anything. Yeah, and it's like, why are we doing this? Because everyone else is. That's why we're doing this. Well, they're taking toilet paper, so I better take some too. We might run out. Oh my goodness. The other thing everyone does is, God, don't you care that we're perishing? And for many people, the answer is, God says, no, I don't. Or worse, God's judging us. That's not for today, but I will tell you that is a terrible answer. This whole idea of using Psalm 91 that if you have enough faith, you're not going to get the coronavirus. Look, dude, show me one disciple that's never gotten sick and died eventually. Show me any human being over the course of the last 8 bazillion billion years that had the faith that they never got sick and died. Show me one. And by the way, Jesus, what happened to him in the end? Oh, yeah. Take homes for you. Why did Jesus calm the storm? A couple things to remind us he is God, not the gods of Judah. Jesus created the wind and the waves. Yes, God created the world and the natural order of the world. And as we learn and our science grows, we need to respect it. We need to understand it. But we don't need to be afraid of it. Rather, a healthy fear of the Lord is the beginning of all wisdom. Fear God in a healthy way. Because ultimately, your walk with Him is all that's going to matter too. God does care when you think you're perishing. James 4:8, draw near to God and He will draw near to you. Note, the disciples had to go to Jesus. They had to draw near to Jesus. Jesus didn't run out of the ship and say, here I am. Shh, let me do this for you. They had to go to Him and say, Master, Teacher, help us. When we have these times of need, you can get caught up in the chaos and you quit praying. You can get caught up in the chaos and you quit having your devotionals. You get caught up in the chaos and rather than being at home worshiping, I'm glad you are, you just quit worshiping. Well, church is closed, so I guess I'm not going to have Sabbath today. No. That is the opposite of what we need to do. We need to run to Jesus and say, I need you in this time of need. And note, we are disciples of Jesus. We are to act like Jesus. And when Jesus emerged from the ship and saw the storm around him, what did he say? Peace. Calm. Be still. Is that how y'all have handled this past week? And I don't just mean coronavirus. When you have faced a storm in this past week, when you've faced this unknown outcome of the future that you can't control, when you face whatever it is, have you looked at that and said, peace. The Lord is with me. Who can be against me? The Lord said in the world, I'm going to have distress. Oh, yeah. But He's overcome the world. Paul says, let me tell you the secret to all this. It is Christ in you. That's the anchor. And folks, there is no other. We're not going to end with a fellowship time today. So we're going to end with an invitation. I want y'all to think about one question. Or, like me, I'll make it two. But think about this question. Wait, if you come play with us. When you've answered the question, pray about it, and then go. If you're online, don't leave to go do whatever until you've answered this question. Where do you need to choose hope over despair? Where do you need to choose peace over chaos? I don't know the exact words that work for you. Peace, hope, chaos, despair. Where has your mind been sidetracked? Where has Jesus not been your God? Where has Jesus not been your anchor? Where do you look at some unknown in the future? And rather than focusing on Christ and following where He leads, you've strayed in here. Talk to the Lord about that. Bow your head. I would encourage you to I'm not even going to pray for us. Pray in your own way. If you want to come to the altar, you're welcome to. Love you guys. Thank you for joining us online. And Lord willing, well, I'll be preaching next week at 11 no matter. But Lord willing, we'll see you next week at 11. Let's all pray.